Sure. My name is Michael McDonald, and I am a survivor of childhood sex abuse by the clergy, and I am from the eastern part of the state, from the Archdiocese of Philadelphia.
My name is Sean Daugherty. I too am a survivor of child sex abuse by a priest. I am from Johnstown, Pennsylvania, from the Altoona-Johnstown Diocese.
My name is Jim Van Sickle. I'm from Bradford, PA, the Diocese of Erie. I am a survivor. I also advocate in all 6 dioceses because I think they need to be represented.
My name is James Paluszek. I grew up in Erie, Pennsylvania, which is where I was molested by my pastor, Reverend Daniel J. Martin, when I was 16. In spite of that experience, I also became a Catholic priest and left active ministry in August of 2014 because it was unhealthy for me to remain in that environment, and it led me to become a whistleblower and to testify before the 40th investigating grand jury.
Thank you. Let's begin by going around the table and having each one of you spend just a few minutes, if you will, giving us your narrative of your story, your personal story.
So I was abused between the ages of 11 and 13 by 2 Catholic priests, the now defrocked Francis X. Trauger from the Archdiocese of Philadelphia and Reverend John P. Schmier. I still call him Reverend because he was only removed from active ministry after the allegations towards him came about. At the age of 11, I was asked to become an altar boy. It was these were stepping stones for young men in our Catholic school. After that, I was asked to work the phones in the rectory. And what I've learned now, hindsight has its 20/20 vision, that was the grooming ground. Both of these priests saw opportunity, and they preyed on the young men that were altar boys and young men who worked and volunteered their time in their parish. They also took a look at the families and how devoted those families were. I was the youngest of 8 children, and our family was very devout, very active in the church. The predators, the priests in that parish saw that, and they knew that if something did happen and word got out that my families, those active families, most likely wouldn't say anything. That was the culture back then. So it began with small confessions, it began with a little touch and play, and then you were invited to go on trips, fishing trips, camping trips, trips down to the Jersey Shore. What 11, 12, or 13-year-old wouldn't enjoy that? Didn't know what happened to me then. I know all the details today. Francis Trauger would insist that you sleep in the same bed with him. He would insist that he suffered muscle pain and that it was that individual who was with him, the child that was with him, to help him relieve that tension. Only to wake up finding that I had been abused myself, touched in every inappropriate place possible. The morning that happened and I woke up in complete shock, I now know what shock to the human body is. I sat frozen in complete stillness on the step of this mountain home in Mountaintop, PA, where it was a very cold morning and all I wanted to do was to get back home to my mom. And I could. Immediately I went into survivor mode. I went into shut down everything that just happened. Protect that. Protect that secret. And I did that for many years up until the age of 35. We talk often about the statute of limitations. At age 11 in 1980 and in 1981 and beyond, the statute of limitations was 2 years old. Ask an 11-year-old what a statute of limitation even is, and then ask that same 11-year-old when he or she would like to talk about what happened to them. The Reverend John P. Schmier, very same scenario, would invite young men to come down to his shore home where he owned a fishing boat, co-owned it with another priest. And they would drink at the close of the day after fishing. And we would be out on the dock crabbing. After they had had a couple of their drinks, the Reverend John Schmier pinned me down and stripped me naked and allowed live crabs to crawl over my body. This was amusing to them. This was their power. This was their sickness. Another, I would not talk about that until age 35. This wasn't a conversation I wanted to have with the friends that I played on the ball field with. It wasn't a conversation that I was going to have with girls that I dated. It wasn't a conversation that I was going to have when I enjoyed my first drink in a bar at age 21. It wasn't a conversation I was going to have in either of the two marriages that failed in my life. I learned how to perfect the art of hiding pain, to hold on to my deepest, darkest secrets, my fear, my anger, resentment. Eventually, they would manifest themselves in ways that some people wouldn't believe. No, it's not my fault, but it is my responsibility to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And it is my responsibility to create a good life for myself, a purpose-filled life, and for that of my family. And that's why I'm here today.
Nice job. My name is Sean Daugherty. I grew up in western Pennsylvania, small steel town, Johnstown. A very Irish Catholic devoted family. I'm number 8 out of 9 children, altar boy. We walked to school. I grew up a block from the church. The church was an intricate part of my entire family's life. My priest, Father George Kaharchik, who is defrocked, named in the Altoona Johnstown grand jury investigation, began when I was in the 5th grade. I started 5th grade at 10 years old. Father Karchik was my religion teacher, and he was also my basketball coach. Father liked to use sport. He ran every soccer practice with us. He was at every football game. Basketball practice, he was the coach. It started tickling, fun, grabbing, wrestling. He would allow you to, we didn't have a gym at St. Clement's School, so we used the gym in Brownstown at St. Michael's School, and we would either ride the bus and get off there and ride home with Father or ride with Father. Father would let you drive his car when you were 10, 11, 12 years old. He'd pull you over close, put you right here on his seat. What started at the knee ended up on your crotch. He was enamored with my penis, with my genital area. Any time that he could touch me, he touched me. Any sporting event that we would do, racquetball, golf, biking, that required a shower, we would shower. He would bathe thoroughly, I got called out of school to serve more funeral masses than probably any of my classmates on Tuesdays. We would go to the cemetery, we would come back, and I would miss lunch, so Father would take us to McDonald's. I would be abused in the car on the way and abused on the car on the way. And I've never forgotten this. Chicken McNuggets came out. We're one of 9 children. That was huge for us. We didn't, eat out that often. He would always say the same thing, chicken nuggets. And he'd hand you the nuggets, and they'd always get honey. And he'd say, want some? Always a pause. Honey? Want some? Honey? It was a joke. Up in my 8th grade year, he was just up and moved, unbeknownst to the entire community. Nobody knew anything, everybody loved him, everybody was upset. Later in life, through conversations like this, I found out that somebody did tell on him, and met with Monsignor, and then met with Bishop Hogan, and they agreed 6 months afterwards. They transferred him, 6 months after it was reported. They allowed me and 3 other guys, I don't know if they were abused or not, one I do, but allowed us into the rectory to pack his belongings. Right? While we were in the rectory that night, he got called out of his room by, I'm assuming it was Monsignor, and I would like to think, looking back at a grown man, he was saying, what the hell do you have those guys in your room? We're moving you for sexually molesting 2 boys. We continued to pack up his things. We packed up the bookshelf. The entire top bookshelf was medical journals of male genitalia. You know, I was in the 8th grade. Father Karchik came back in the room, looked right up at the top bookshelf, said, who packed up the top bookshelf? There were 4 guys. You know, we were laughing. Oh, Father likes the oath. Then they allowed us to get in the car, go to Portage, to the new rectory, in the new school where they sent them, and allowed 4 boys that were in the 8th grade to spend the first night in the new rectory after he was transferred from molesting boys. To this day, I can still see the car. I don't remember my dad's cars. I remember his cars. I can still hear Arlo Guthrie's Alice's Restaurant playing in the tape deck. I can hear the Bill Cosby tapes. I can see his brown guitar in his room. I can see the bookshelf. I can feel the shower running down my body from the racquetball club. I can see him. I can smell him. I can see him getting excited. I knew when he was getting excited because he would chew the inside of his tongue and cheek. I'll never forget that. It never goes away. So when I was 21, I took an oath of office, or an oath of the Navy. I joined the Navy. When I got out of boot camp to come back to Pennsylvania, before I got sent to my duty station, I felt obligated to start talking about it, and I did. And it was just difficult for people to hear, and I got angered, and I tracked him down to the rectory that he was at. I sat outside of that rectory at 21 years old for 3 hours. I was talking to myself to go in. 3 hours I sat there. The only thing that prevented me from going in, 2 things. I didn't know if I'd stop if I started beating him up. I didn't know if I could stop. It was also Christmas. I got home from boot camp Christmas Eve, and I thought of his mother. So I stopped myself from going in. Had I known that night what I know today, I don't know that I would have been able to stop myself that night. So I'm thankful to be here, and I'm happy for anybody and everybody that's watching.
Excuse me.
Again, Jim Van Sickle from Bradford, PA. I now live in Pittsburgh, PA. The grooming process that these gentlemen just spoke on, I won't reiterate my same grooming process, but predators look at you, and they look for your need, and they fill it. Bottom line. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter what socioeconomic class you come from or what town you live in. It has everything to do with them and their need. I met David Polson as a English teacher at Bradford Central Christian. Immediately became a friend. Immediately asked me to be the captain of his chess team. My senior class was 46 strong. When I got to Bradford Central, I was 46 out of the educationally. Matter of fact, 45 was so far in front of me I had to use binoculars. But David Polson was the one who pulled me in spiritually, educationally, and turned my life around. And that's not easy to say after what's happened since. I wouldn't have went to St. Vincent's College or college period if he hadn't done that for me. But at the same time, he had a different plan. I thought I had a friend. I thought I had somebody I could share with, somebody I could go to with any issue that I might have. And I did. And the more information he got, the more the predator came out in him. I held the secret for 36 years. This past February, my mother sent me a flyer from the church saying that he was accused. I was traumatized all over again. It was probably 3 or 4 days of, I don't even think I slept. I didn't know what to do. I had a secret. And I read in the paper that it was just one person. And so I had to come forward. So I called the newspaper and got the Diocese of Erie. And within a moment or two, I was talking on a three-way with KL Gates, I believe it is, KL and Gates. And I realized that I was talking to Erie. I didn't realize that that was the number. So I said, I think I'm calling the wrong team. Could you direct me to the other team? And they sent me to Stephen Adamans from the AG's office. I sent him an email. He responded in about 10 minutes. 5 minutes after that, we were on the phone. That would have been a Friday evening. And he said, we have a grand jury meeting on March 15th, which was like 4 days later. He said, would you be interested in testifying? And I said, yeah. And he said, I'll give you a subpoena and everything. And I said, I don't need one, I'll be there. And I walked through the doors and I testified. But I can't tell you the fear that I've just in the last 4 months. I've only been outspoken in 4 months. But I just felt for that kid like 36 years of completely being alone. Completely believing that I didn't count, that I didn't have friends, that I couldn't be loved. Being married during that time and not understanding why my wife would show me love, but I couldn't feel it, so it was never enough. And her fighting back and me pushing her away when she got too close, and just the constant battle of emotional, the emotions that you're going through. That all stems from the grooming process. 2 years ago, I'm still thinking that was I abused? Did he really do this? Maybe he didn't. It's been 36, I haven't heard a thing. Trust me, I've followed him every prayer she went to. So to hide that is hard. To come out was hard. But if you're sitting out there and you're listening to this, or you're hearing from us, it was the most freeing thing I think I've ever done in my life. It was the most empowering thing I've ever done in my life. Someone who reached out to me on Facebook not too long ago just basically said to me, Jim, I'm taking my life back. I'm done with this. I don't care who hears my story. I don't care how they view it. I don't care anything about it. And I was like, okay, I'm with you. Let's do this. And I've just watched the numbers on Facebook grow. As I was coming here today, I received a call or a message from a woman in Ireland who wanted to speak with me because she's been following the posts and all the stuff that we're sharing with each other. And she's scared. She doesn't know what to do. There's more than one person that's been abused in her family. So I spoke with her on the ride here, and we'll probably speak again. And I can't fix her problem, and it's not my ability to do that, but I can share with her a huge group, a large voice here in Pennsylvania that's just coming together, supporting each other. The phone lines are probably ringing all night. I know I don't get to sleep until late. If somebody needs to talk, I'm there to talk. And I think that's where I'm at. The anger, the frustration. I'm one of the lucky ones. Father Paluszek was accused, charged. Josh Shapiro used the grand jury presentment, charged him. In that presentment, there's victim 1, victim 2, and a Bradford Central Christian student who was credible, who was outside the statute of limitations. So he cannot press charges. That's me. I can't tell you how appreciative I am to Josh for even adding me to that report, because it was a little bit of vindication. It was a little bit of a, hey, somebody's listening, somebody's heard me. And I know there are many, many other survivors or victims that haven't been heard, feel like they haven't been heard, praying that they'll be heard. And we're hoping that you'll reach out, you'll come join us. David Polson will have a hearing in the fall, and I know there's a lot of people following that case. But pray for the 2 victims that are still young, and hopefully they don't have to live the life that the 4 of us have.
My name is James Paluszek, and I grew up in Erie, Pennsylvania, and was in Erie from the time I was 2 years old to when I went away for graduate seminary in 1991. I had, in some ways, at least outwardly, a very idyllic childhood. I have a wonderful family. My parents are deceased now. I love my brothers and sister and mom and dad, but we by no means had a perfect family, and there was turmoil in the family and a fair amount of neglect in the family, at least on an emotional level. My parents were both very devout Catholics, and Mom, for instance, when she graduated from secretarial school in Syracuse, New York, back in the 50s, her first job was as a chancery secretary for the Diocese of Ogdensburg, New York. And so Mom was very much influenced by some very positive experiences of interacting with bishops and chancery officials. When the cathedral in Ogdensburg burnt down, Mom was part of the organizing of the capital campaign to rebuild the cathedral. So when we moved to Erie, we lived right around the corner from St. George Church, within 2 blocks. And from a very early time, I can remember 5 years old, Father Martin grooming me, Father Martin giving me special attention, special treatment, talking to me in ways that he never talked to adults. And my dad didn't notice a lot of that attention, but my mother certainly did. And it was kind of a feather in her cap. Just a few minutes ago, Mike mentioned that we've been altar boys, and the unique thing with him that I picked up, you would never hear of this happening again today, but I was hired as a student secretary in the rectory when I was in 5th grade, and I had the auspicious duty of stuffing the bulletins and alphabetizing the collection envelopes so they could be entered into the giving record of parishioners. And it was just that subtle weaving of my life into the fabric of Father Martin's life and his knowledge of the vulnerabilities in our family. He knew about my vulnerabilities because my parents went to him for confession with their problems. They ended up getting divorced years later, but he knew that there were mental health issues. He knew that there were issues of alcohol. And when I got into about 10th grade was when the real, I don't know, the pandemonium of being a teenager and not having strong male mentors. I gravitated towards the priests in our parish. Some of them were very good men. Some of them are in ministry today. But I also saw some really shady people, and it wasn't just my abuser, but also other priests in the Erie Diocese that would be parked at St. George's for periods of time because Father Martin was friends with the bishop. He could be relied upon to harbor a pedophile. And some of these folks have been named already because of public reporting, and I assume some more of them are going to be named as a result of this grand jury. I obviously bought into the mythology of the church because in spite of what happened to me, I became a priest. Because I was playing my guitar at church, because I was a server, because I was involved with everything, because it was the center of our neighborhood, the priests, the nuns in our parish convent, they were like family. And I saw the good work that some of them did, the few good apples. By the way, this is not a story, this is not a phenomenon about a few bad apples. We might, at the end of this, be able to tell a story about a few good apples, if we're lucky. I believed God was calling me to become a priest because it felt good to help people. And even though I was 16 when the abuse started and 19 when I put an end to it, when I had to summon the courage because nobody else, family included, were listening to me, I still felt called to be a priest. I'd be lying if I sat here and said I don't feel called. I still feel called. But there's nothing about this church that seems familiar to me, either familiar to my hopes and aspirations for it or for myself. And can I risk the perception of arrogance by saying, I don't think there's much about this church that Christ would recognize today. If we cannot protect our most vulnerable members, whether we're talking about our history here, or we're talking about child protection, which I think basic humanity suggests that we shouldn't need special classes to go to the police when we see a kid being molested, but evidently the Catholic Church needs special tutorials about that kind of behavior. If we don't know instinctively, because of our shared humanity, that our most vulnerable members are the ones who need the most care, then I don't know what we can say. I can't say I recognize this church. I can say that I've come to a point where I've been able to talk about what happened to me. I don't think I'll ever be at peace with what happened to me, but what I can't stomach is the fact that everywhere that I turned as a victim, nobody ever listened to me in the church. The church never, Bishop Troutman, Bishop Persico, never followed the statutory requirements of the Dallas Charter for the Protection of Children. Never did they ask, should we investigate this? Never did they follow up with me. I had to follow up with them. They couldn't even follow their own contemporary protocols. We need the grand jury report. We need law enforcement in Pennsylvania to do the work that we can't do. We can't afford lobbyists. We can't donate to politicians. We can't pay for insurance. And as I say, what happened to me, nothing can change it. And but we can try to change Pennsylvania. We can try to change this church and wake a few people up. But we need our elected officials and we need our law enforcement agencies to step up and do what we can't do.
Thank you, James. I'm going to go ahead and open the discussion to some questions. I'm going to allow John Paluszek, the new page editor, to go ahead and take the first question.
James, I want to actually stay with you for a minute, if I could. I mean, you come to this table with a vantage what nobody else has. You've been both a survivor and a member of the clergy. And I'm curious about how this phenomenon is regarded internally by the church. Listening to each of you speak, it sounds like it's almost an open secret within the church hierarchy that this is going on, and it's discussed. And so you have this vantage point internally. Are they talking about it? Are they saying, you should go here? And I mean, what is that culture like?
There's studies that show, there's qualitative research by people like Richard Sipe, who's a former priest, by Father Tom Doyle, who's currently a Dominican priest, very much active in this on the national scene. Father Cousins, who was the rector of the seminary in Cleveland, Ohio. Some very reputable people have suggested that between 40 and 60% of Catholic priests are sexually active. That's not my statistic I'm throwing out. That's other people's data, other people's information. I'd be happy to back that up if necessary. That's with adults. That's talking about consensual types of things. But that secret, when you've professed, as I professed, to be celibate in front of my people, when you're hiding that secret, which I think most people in the pews would recognize, priests are human and perhaps have a right to that and have a right to be married. But a bishop having to maintain that epidemic level of secrecy is what has given cover to the criminal behavior of priests against children. So as a priest, as a functioning priest, I was simply a rank and file priest. I had wonderful assignments in terms of the mission of those assignments, the work that I did and the people I got to work with. Really, a blessed set of opportunities. But even my priest friends, they would say to me, Jim, they'd say this to me in confession, Jim, you can have this other life as well, just go to confession. I can't tell. When I would go to confession, I'd be confessing fantasies, being a good Catholic and having feelings of guilt over a thought. I had priests again and again. When I was a priest, Father Paluszek, Jim's molester, was one of my confessors. Paluszek never said this to me, but many others said it to me, and some of them may be watching. Jim, you can make it work. Just deal with your dating life in the internal forum. Deal with it in confession. So there was this network, and there was a gay subculture in every diocese that I've been a part of, familiar with. And what I know, just from being a rank and file, we all knew who the molesters were, because they were in and out of treatment. You knew that Father Tom Smith, okay, he's on the Erie list, he was in treatment, came back. Father Hannon, who was given cover at St. George's by my abuser, Father Martin. It was a well-known secret in Erie in the 80s that he molested children at the neighboring parish. And he was retired early, but allowed to serve publicly and brought into the Diocese of Honolulu to serve as a priest after he did that in Erie. He'd come back to St. George's for the summer when I was working as a student secretary. We all knew this. We all knew these guys were in and out. And the most recent reporting shows that, that Bishop Troutman and Bishop Persico likely sat on allegations for years before they did anything. That's after the Dallas Charter. That's after they've made public statements with district attorneys saying that we would never return a man to ministry who had a credible allegation. Well, Father Paluszek confessed on tape. It sounds like a pretty compelling allegation to me. Bishop Troutman knew that in 2010. Bishop Persico knew it in 2012. Father Paluszek was arrested a few months ago. That's your material. I don't want to. But as a rank and file priest, we all knew. And I couldn't stomach being around even the good apples, because if they were doing anything, they were burying their heads in the sand.
Let me ask each of you this, putting aside to the extent that's possible, this experience. How intact is your actual faith? How deeply, obviously deeply shaken, but how intact is it now as you sit here?
For me, I had to regain faith. I've learned through a series of life events that I need a spiritual connection. And that's because I suffer from the disease of addiction. Recovered today. However, I do not need a Roman collar to tell me when to sit, stand, kneel, to go through these motions. I question those true faithful of the Catholic Church. I question everything that they do. I have found the hard way that religion is truly for those that are scared to go to hell, and that spirituality is for those that have been there. And myself, these gentlemen, and thousands of others across this Commonwealth have been there. So, I as much as I love my God has saved my life, but that's all I need. I don't need any formalities. I don't need any confessions. It's He and I at the end of the day. And the only thing that my God asks me is to leave the day a little bit better than I found it. And that's my motto, and it works very well.
My faith is wrecked. I was abused so young. I honestly don't know if I ever in my life had faith. Once this started happening, I went on to McCourt. I don't know what the exact math is, but I do a guess, but upwards of 70% of the priests that were in my life were in the Altoona-Johnstown report. So I struggle. I struggle. I have a hope. Mine is more of a hope that there is something else out there, that this can't just be it. I will say my mom is, I'm sure, happy to hear that I pray, but I don't pray anything like I was taught to pray, and most of the times it usually ends up with an argument out loud with myself, calling myself an idiot for even doing this. I can't, let's just say if God exists, I have a lot of apologizing to do for some things that I have said over the years out loud in my car, my version of praying, but I struggle hard with it.
I was raised in a Catholic family. I went to public school until I went to Bradford Central Christian, and after my abuse I went to St. Vincent's College in Latrobe, Benedictine, and definitely came out of all that without being a Catholic. So I did not raise my children to be Catholic. I'm a born-again Christian. I believe Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. I read about it. I draw conclusions. I go to non-denominational churches. I didn't like myself after this. There was nothing else left for me to reach to than the Bible. So my strength has actually gotten stronger and continues to get stronger. And I can feel the Lord working in my life. I mean, people reaching out to me, those things don't just happen to the everyday Joe. I believe that those things are brought to you. So my faith is a lot stronger, and I got to be honest. I'm not against the religion or the faithful in the Catholic Church. I truly am not. I'm after the criminals and those who covered those criminals up. The church and any denomination can be a great force of good, and all have. And then, by the way, it's not just the Catholic Church. For anybody out there that might be wondering, we'll sidebar, but I hope we can help to purge them and get them back to where they can be respected again. There are a lot of Catholics that are basically half Catholic, if that makes any sense.
When I was a kid, even before I thought about becoming a priest, sitting in the pew and looking up and seeing the priests, whoever they were, I ascribed a lot of authority to that. They were a conduit to God. When I became a priest and stood at the altar, and I know I have some folks who are following this right now that recall these moments when I would stand at the altar and look out at them. And two things happened when I would stand at the altar. And one is, more from the pulpit, I would try to speak something to them that would give them strength, that would give them hope, that if they were a bruised reed or a smoldering wick, they would feel that life isn't as tenuous as it feels if you have God as a part of that. And that was what I would try to speak to people. More often than not, when I'd be praying to God at the altar, I'd be saying, one thing that you could do, God, that wouldn't be too unrealistic or too much to ask, just make life a little bit easier. Don't make it all the hardship go away, all the pain go away. Just make it a little bit easier. And that's what I was saying to God on behalf of my congregation. So the question is, how is my faith today? I don't stand in that position anymore. I don't have that privilege. I don't have a problem with not using my title or wearing the collar or any of the trappings of priesthood or the church, and I don't ever need them again. I didn't need them much to begin with. But for me to sit in a church, and I am a practicing Catholic, but for me to sit in church and look up at the priest today, knowing that I was that person who had that chance to be the channel. I go to Mass in a foreign language. Sometimes I go, if it's in English, it's a gospel Catholic church, which is a whole different thing. It's worth being a part of. More often than not, I go to Mass in Polish or Spanish because I don't want to, I know what the priest is saying, but I don't want to hear those words ringing the way that they used to. I can't sit through Mass without bawling my head off. And not so much because of what Father Martin did to me, but what the church did to me and the people that I served after the fact. These bishops today are wolves in shepherd's clothing. And as I said, my faith is not what it was when I was in active ministry. It's certainly, and it shouldn't be what it was when I was a child. But I call all of our faithful Catholics sitting in the pews today, you need to be adults in your faith today, not children.
Thank you, James.
Thank you.
We have, as you know, we've seen this scandal play out all across not only our nation, but play out all across the world. We've had here in the U.S., we've had, the Boston, we've had Philadelphia, we've seen it everywhere. This is, we know, a report that exceeds 800 pages. Does this feel like a different moment? Do you think that we are about to maybe experience something that's different this time around? Mike?
100%. This is going to be a scathing report, but I believe that it's going to be monumental in truly waking up the eyes of the disbelievers, the eyes of the people that don't want to take a look at that elephant in the pew. This is going to be the one report that shifts and supports survivors and victims versus what we have seen time and time again, and that is the protection of predators and the institutions that shield them. No one knew more and no one did less to protect children than the Roman Catholic Church. This report is going to be the straw that does break that camel's back.
Does anyone else want to add to that?
I just have a strong feeling, the report is so important on so many levels. Some people are hanging by a thread, praying that they can be vindicated in some way or mentioned or heard. But other of us, I look at this report as not the end, but the beginning. What do we do with this information? How do we take it the next step? You know, how do we educate people to what's actually being said there?
And that's what's actually different now too. I mean, to add to what both of these guys have just said, we're sitting in a room on a live feed, bearing our souls, to where we spoke individually about how it was incredibly difficult just to even talk about it. Now we've come so far, and just as you said, the disbelievers have come so far to where we are so bold to say, this is where it's changing. You know, this is where that report is changing, to where we're sitting here telling the opposition, the ones that are tying this up in court, this is the next level. This is what this report is. You know, you're not hiding us. You are more than welcome after us. Come right here to Patriot News and make your argument to the people of Pennsylvania. Bishops, come here, make your argument, make your presentment. Politicians that are opposing Mark Rossi's, come here, live, bear all. That's what's different in this report. That's the just overall boldness. This isn't innuendo anymore. This isn't just a couple people whispering here and there. This is going to show that every diocese in Pennsylvania has done.
Yes.
And these guys might be able to say more about this than me. When Altoona Johnstown had their report at the conclusion of the 37th investigating grand jury, there wasn't this holdup by interested parties.
Perfect. Yeah.
You know, we know that there are multiple priests. The Priest Association of Pittsburgh, for example, they've made public statements about this. We know that there are other interested parties who could be Catholic hospitals, Catholic schools, insurance people. It could be any. It could be retired bishops. It could be bishops perhaps who aren't in Pennsylvania anymore. What I would say is that what's different about this report, this is not Altoona Johnstown times 6. There's something of a different nature. We don't even know what it was. You know, we've talked to people, we've talked to other victims, some of us testified. It doesn't matter. I think we all have come away with a sense that Altoona Johnstown was a powerful report. My sense in talking with law enforcement after that was that they wanted to do more, but they ran out of time. And like I say, I just think these 6 dioceses in Pennsylvania, they're not just looking for a rogues gallery of priests, and they're not looking simply, I think that the one of the most just things that the report will do is give victims a voice, feel for the first time that they had a voice, but I don't think there would be this level of protests if they weren't, let's say it frankly, aiming higher.
Yeah.
Much higher.
They've got to be. I mean, they just like what James said. You know, there was no backlash after the Altoona Johnstown. There was no Supreme Court stay. There was no what and who is in this report that is so powerful. That is, you know, why? We already had Philadelphia. We already had Altoona. The bishops are saying they're not hunting. What is in the report? It's got to be damning. It, you know, I mean, we're saying what we're saying, but yeah, this report had, you know, we don't know what's in the report. It's a secret. They know what's in the report. They've seen the report. You know, we don't get that luxury. But I know as a person with common sense, they are throwing everything at us and the kitchen sink to block this report. And that's a first in the state of Pennsylvania. So I would think that there is something
It's a
awfully
first in the
big
United
in this
States.
report.
Some very high-powered attorneys are behind this. If you take a look at some of the names, I'm sure that you have in some of the filings and some of the motions that have been filed, the attorneys' names and the firms that they work for are huge. That is not something that you can just scrape up a few family bucks for to help me out.
So we're gonna begin to wrap up. Let me throw this out there. We saw a fairly phenomenal pushback after the Altoona-Johnstown grand jury investigation report to efforts in the legislature to reform the statute of limitations. They got close. The people like Mark Ronci got close. And I know that victims, this is one area that victims have for a long time have called for reform to the law to allow victims who have timed out of the system a chance to, seek legal recourse. Can you talk about why that is so important to victims?
So, statute of limitations reform, giving the opportunity for individuals, that's just a word. It gives them the opportunity to get to that courtroom door. We're talking today about individuals who are blocking the release of a grand jury report. They have that right. What about victims and survivors? Again, as I mentioned earlier, the statute of limitations at age 11 for me was 2 years. They're arbitrary. They're archaic. The importance of getting statute of limitations reform, criminal and civil, changed is going to restore lives, restore faith, and restore justice. We know what happened in House Bill 1947. Mark Rossi introduced that. There wasn't, I believe it was under 20 who voted against it. I believe it was 180 to 15, if I'm almost probably correct. Right. So when the bill entered the Judiciary Committee, before it got to the Senate side, let's take a look at the players at that table. The players at that table were Senator Stu Greenleaf, was the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. He and his firm defended the Archdiocese of Wilmington, his law firm. So let's follow the money trail. He was not going to let that bill get to the floor. If that bill would have gotten to the floor for a vote, very, very few would have voted against it. If they had voted against it, it's probably because they wanted to save their career. So it's a money thing. Insurance industry and the Pennsylvania Catholic Conference and their lobbyists are putting buku bucks up to block this from becoming a reality.
And it's really simple. There are two sides to this argument, all right? Mark Rossi's very common sense legislation. We have report after study showing why it takes victims so long to come forward, how the government is groomed, the police department is groomed, how everything in the community is set up against the victim and benefits the abuser, right? There has got to be a punishment. There has got to be a deterrent from having this happen, okay? And the political battle, right? I was in that fight, Senator Joe Scarnati, the Senate pro temp, 2 days before the end of that legislative session, had the power, could have taken that bill. I stood outside of his office, he came out, and I asked him for the vote, and he told me that he would pray for the victims with 2 days to me. I said, I don't need your prayer. I need a vote. And you can see this was on WJAC News. There was a news camera there, all right? Recently, his spokesman just came out a few weeks ago and said this Mark Rossi's legislation would unfairly target and unfairly bankrupt Catholic churches. That's where the Senate pro temp of this state is. He thinks that that legislation is going to unfairly treat the church. All right? We have data that shows in other states
Right.
that that didn't happen.
It's all propaganda.
It's all propaganda. All right. This is an election season. This is what we're arguing for. The protection of children. We are not sitting here today because this is the best thing in the world to talk about. I don't have children. All right. I am never going to have children. My children will never, ever, ever be sexually abused. Ever. Because I don't have any. Everybody out there, I cannot make that guarantee for you because your current legislators are protecting these pedophiles. All right? And if you agree with us and you want to see this legislation, I urge you, go to change.org. In the search bar for change.org, enter Senator Scarnati, your prayers are not enough. That is my petition. I started that petition after I came public and after they shut this bill down 2 years ago. It has just over 80,000 signatures, and we need every Pennsylvania signature that we can get to tell Senator Scarnati, Senator Corman, Senator Eichelberger, Senator Langerholm, that this needs to go to the floor for a vote, regardless of whether you think it's constitutional or not. You are not judges. We have judges, and this has never, ever, ever gone to the court for a ruling. Take this bill, to take Rozzi's real deal legislation and protect the children in your district instead of protecting the people that are raping them. Thank you.
Sean, a quick follow-up for you on that. And do you think this bill's going to add some, or sorry, the release of the report rather is going to add some rocket fuel to that push? I say that because there's only a handful of days, as you probably know, left in this legislative session after they come back from summer break. And then if this bill doesn't get a vote, it has to be reintroduced and the process begins anew in January of next year.
If this bill does not go to the floor after this report comes out, every person in Pennsylvania needs to go to the voting polls and change this legislation. All right? There is no way this bill, if this report comes out, and we've heard the stories, we see them in the paper all the time, you know, and it's not just the church. The church is protecting. It's doctors that are doing this. It's coaches that are doing this. It's Boy Scouts that are doing this. It's people's fathers, people's grandfathers, their uncles, their brothers. The vast majority of it happens in the home. This legislation will protect those guys. This church and these high-priced lawyers and these bought politicians are protecting their church instead of protecting the other 98% of the Pennsylvania kids that are being raped.
Real quick, and then we'll...
Yeah, can I just make a suggestion too, that this is not a political issue. We live in a political world, and so we have to push for this legislation. A lot of folks talk about these are old memories, and it's hard to bring them up again. It's hard to recall them, and can't you just move on? Or you know that there's no statute of limitations for murder, and you've heard us describe the murder of 4 souls. Do you honestly think that there should be a statute of limitations for that? This is the ethical question that our lawmakers should be asking themselves. This is the moral question that the bishops who support their lobbyists and the lobbying efforts of the PCC should be asking themselves. We can go after somebody who murders somebody, and there's never any question about repressed memories or forgotten history. And to my mind, I think that Senator Scarnati, who styles himself as a wonderful and famous Catholic, that he would be blocking something that protects the most vulnerable people in the state of Pennsylvania. Like I said, I don't recognize too much about my church these days.
Well, thank you so much. I know I speak for everyone that we could continue this conversation for several more hours, but we're out of time. But I thank you so much for your willingness and your courage to come here today and have this conversation with us.
We thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for your persistence.
Yes.